This brief video will walk through the new features on the website to allow students to self-register and/or self-pay for their Skills USA membership. This feature has been released recently and has several different options. The state director controls these options, and they will enable or disable the self-registration and self-payment options for the entire state. And they will also configure or enable the demographic questions that are available, including race, gender, things like that. The advisor can enable individual training programs as desired. So if you're the advisor of the welding program and someone else is the advisor of the cosmetology program, you can configure just your training program and not mess with the other folks' training programs. And the idea here is you turn these features on during your class and provide your students with the 5-character registration code specific to the training program. That registration code allows those students to go online with their cell phone and register themselves as Skills USA members. They enter their own name, their own date of birth, their gender, and again, if the state director is enabled, the additional demographic questions, those additional questions will be available. And then when you're finished, the advisor can disable that functionality so that students don't continue adding registrations after the class is over. To enable and disable the student self-registration and self-payment, there's a new button you'll find in the bottom of your list of training programs called Configure Self-Reg or Self-Pay. Now again, if the state director has only enabled self-payment, that's the only option you'll have, or maybe the state director has only enabled self-registration, that's the only option you'd have, or maybe the state director has enabled both. Either way, you'll click the Edit option to enable each training program, and then you'll share the registration code with your students. So here's where you'll find at the bottom of your list of training programs here on the registration site the button for Configure Self-Registration Self-Payment. When you click that button, it will take you to a screen that shows you all of the training programs in your school. And if you're just the advisor for one training program, you may not be able to edit or enable any of the others. You'd only see yours. Or if you're a school administrator or you have access to all the training programs, then you can click the Edit button and either enable or disable the self-registration and or self-payment columns. Again, the state director controls which of these are allowed in your state. So if you don't see self-pay or you don't see enable self-reg, that just means the state director has not allowed it in your state. Another thing to note is that these self-registration and self-payment programs are not available for middle school training programs. They are only available for high school and college training programs. So when you're ready to enable your students to self-register or self-pay, you'll edit the row for your training program and then check these boxes on for each item you want to enable. In this case, I've only enabled self-registration but not self-payment for the law enforcement training program, whose registration code is R8807. So this is the code that I would give to my students. So there are two paths for what happens when the student goes to register for Skills USA using these tools. If self-payment is not enabled, then the students enter their own information, their own name, their own date of birth, and they join, they submit that. And the advisor then validates that information, sort of reviews it all, and the advisor is the one that actually joins the students, just like you normally would, as if the advisor had typed the student's information in himself. In that scenario, an invoice is generated for the advisor to pay if they're not on an affiliation plan, and the advisor pays that invoice himself or with a school check or credit card or whatever for the entire training program all at once. On the other path, if self-pay is enabled, same concept, the students enter their own data, but at the end of the screen, the student is presented with a screen with a button to pay now, and when they click that button, they are encouraged to complete their payment by credit card online, and when they make that payment, they are immediately registered and completely joined as an official Skills USA member. Now the students have to pay for that online with a credit card in order to get that instant joining capability. And if they don't, if they just close out the browser or whatnot, then that registration is still saved, but the advisor would then subsequently be able to pay for that as usual if they'd like. So this is what the screen looks like. You send your students to www.skillsusa-register.org/join. And the student then selects, again, this is on his phone or a tablet or a PC or whatever, the student selects his state that they're with and enters that 5-digit code that you gave them from the prior screen. And when the student enters that information, they are given a screen to fill out their first name, last name, date of birth, gender, and then optionally, if the state director has enabled the optional demographics questions, you'll see a bunch of questions there, particularly related to Perkins funding. If your school or school district is interested in collecting these stats for Perkins funding, that information will be available. All of it is optional, nothing is required. The only thing the student has to provide to continue is the first and last name. So that's the first path. The second path, if student self-pay is enabled, very similar. The student will choose their state and enter their code, and then they'll be given a screen that asks whether they're trying to register, or maybe they already registered and they just came back to pay. Sometimes a student might not have maybe his parents' credit card information when they first register, and they could come back and pay for that registration later. If that's the case, if they click the Pay Here button, they'll have a list of the students who have registered already, and they can just click the Pay Now link to go ahead and pay for themselves with a credit card online. If they click the Register Here button, then they're presented with the same exact screen where they fill in the first name and the last name and the date of birth, information like that. Optionally, the demographics if the state director has enabled it and they choose to fill that information in. But at the bottom of this screen, assuming self-pay is enabled, there's a slightly different button. Instead of saying Submit, this button will say Pay Now, and it indicates to them exactly how much the fees are going to be. And when the student clicks that Pay Now button, they will be taken immediately to a credit card payment screen for their particular individual single student membership for that year. And they fill out that information and they click Pay Now, their credit card is charged, and that student becomes an official Skills USA member. So what happens next? If self-pay is not enabled, the student's information is saved in the training program. You get the benefits of having the student type all this information in themselves, their current accurate spelling of their name and their date of birth. The advisor then has the opportunity to update or adjust any of that information or delete students. If they decide the advisor sees a student in there that's not part of their class, maybe the advisor can delete that person before they submit the training program. But in that scenario, the advisor is responsible for validating that information before the advisor clicks the Join Now button, just like you've always done. And an invoice will be created. If self-pay is enabled, the student completes that information online and they immediately join Skills USA as official members when they pay. If they stop there and they don't put in their credit card information, they don't actually pay, that information is still saved as part of the training program, and the advisor has the opportunity to review that information, edit or delete. And as you saw, the student could come back the next day and pay if they didn't have a credit card handy. But the advisor then can subsequently review and join the remainder of the students in the training program that may not have self-paid. So some key concepts to remember: your state director controls which of these options are available. If you don't see the self-pay column or you don't see the self-registration column, that just means the state director has not enabled that for your state. You need to reach out to your state director and ask if they plan to use that, or maybe that's just not going to be an option in your state this year. The state director also controls whether the demographics are enabled, if your students are going to have an opportunity to fill out those Perkins-related demographics questions. Once the state director sets all that up, each advisor can enable or disable these two features, self-pay and self-registration, on your own individual training programs. And of course, if you're a school administrator, you can enable or disable these for any program throughout the school. If you want to try this out, log on and give it a try. If you get stuck or you have questions along the way, look at the bottom right-hand side of the screen and click that chat button, or you can always email support@skillsusa-register.org and we'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for your time.